Welcome back to Homesteading with the Zimmermans, where we work hard and play hard on our little corner of land in Iowa. My husband and I were born and raised Old Order Mennonite, or horse and buggy Mennonite, as some refer to them as. And although we are no longer part of that culture or community, we are intentional about passing on the old-fashioned skills of our childhood to the next generation. Before we dive into today's video, I have a little bit of housekeeping. Remember the Bosch mixer and dehydrator giveaway that Michelle and I were doing? Well, there was also daily giveaways. And if you follow the link in the first link in my description, it will take you to Michelle's blog, and on there you can see if you were one of those daily winners that have not yet claimed their prizes. And Michelle and I are so grateful for all of you who participated, and don't forget to watch at the end of the video for the winner of the Bosch mixer and dehydrator. Welcome back, friends. Ruth Ann Zimmerman here for Homesteading with the Zimmermans, and in today's video we are going to be processing more milk, and we're going to be making mozzarella cheese. It's going to be the main focus of this video. And when I first started making cheese, mozzarella was what I made. I was somehow under the assumption that mozzarella is a beginner's cheese. And I've since learned that mozzarella really isn't a beginner's cheese, but I'm going to break it down and make it seem like a beginner's cheese for you. Hopefully I can make it simple enough. And the reason that I believe this cheese is sometimes seen as a beginner's cheese is because you don't have to age it. So as soon as it's done, you can shred it and use it. So that means you don't need a vacuum sealer or learn how to wax your cheese, and you don't need a cheese cave or somewhere for it to age. So I do think that is why it's often seen as a beginner's cheese, because you can make it and use it. So I was making mozzarella for probably a year before I dove into making aged cheeses. So that is what we're going to be working on today. And I know I've just recently done a cheese video, and I'll link that one. That was the farmhouse cheddar cheese. But we are up to our neck in milk every day. We are definitely in the season of lots of milk. So every day I have to process milk to keep it from going to waste. And what really made a difference in how I viewed the processing of the milk, because when we first got a milk cow, the biggest learning curve for me was adjusting to learning to take care of that milk every day. Like, what are we going to do with today's milk? And granted, our first milk cow was a little Dexter milk cow, and she only gave about a gallon a day. But going from using dairy products sparingly to having a gallon of raw milk a day was still a learning curve for me. And the reason I say using raw milk sparingly was because when we were buying milk from the grocery store, or even when we were getting it from our dairy farm neighbors, we used it very sparingly. We didn't use it like we do now. So we were only using like a gallon a week. So going from a gallon a week to a gallon a day was a learning curve for me. So the first thing we did is we got some pigs, and then they were able to utilize the extra milk and turn it into bacon. And then that gave me some room to start practicing making things with my raw dairy. So I started with yogurt, and then I started with schmiakeis, which is a clabber, like a milk that you make with a cheese, a soft spreadable cheese that you make with clabber, and I'll link that video as well. And then that schmiakeis, I started putting that in the refrigerator and then slicing it and using that to replace some of the cheese that we were buying, because even though we were only using like a gallon of milk a day, we were purchasing cheese and yogurt and a lot of other dairy products from the grocery store, butter, So Beth Dowtry, I one time sat in a seminar where she's the author of The Independent Farmstead, and I'll link that book. Sometimes I forget the links, and thank you so much to those of you that remind me. She talked about being conscious of how many of your resources are leaving your farm. And when she said that, it started in my mind, it started this train of thoughts of, if I'm selling milk, because at the time I was getting more milk than what I knew what to do with. If I'm selling milk to friends and neighbors so that I don't have to use it because I can't use all of it, then I am purchasing cheese for the family. So what I'm doing, actually allowing resources, which is raw grass-fed dairy, to leave the farm, and then I'm purchasing lesser value products from the grocery store. So that's what started happening in my brain. I'm like, wait, I'm feeding my family junk cheese. I'm feeding them sliced American cheese product and, cheddar cheese. And at the same time, I could be feeding them a high quality product that comes that's grown and raised and harvested or whatever right here on the farm. So that's when I became serious about utilizing all of the dairy that I possibly can to replace things that I'm buying from the grocery store. So now we have a cheese cave full of high quality raw milk, grass-fed dairy cheese products, and we do not buy any dairy products from the grocery store anymore. On any given day, like today when I'm filming, I'm also making a 4-gallon batch of Parmesan cheese, and in my butter churn I have about 1.5 gallons of fresh grass-fed cream that I am churning into butter. And by the time I'm done processing both the cream and the milk from just this morning's milk, that is equal in value to almost $200 worth of raw grass-fed dairy products. So yeah, I'm not going to be allowing that to leave the farm. That's for the family. And when I say $200 worth, that is if you compare in price to raw grass-fed products that you were buying from, high-end grocery stores, or the Parmesan raw grass-fed milk Parmesan that you were buying from a high-end grocery store. If you can even find that. Here in our area in the grocery store, you wouldn't have access to that. So like I said earlier, what I was buying was much lower quality than what I can make. So all that to say, we are up to our neck in processing dairy these days, and every once in a while I want to do something else, and then the pigs get the milk and turn it into bacon for us. So after straining our milk, we're going to put some of it straight into the cheese pot. So on this morning, we got almost 5 gallons of milk. And because I don't want to make a 5-gallon batch of mozzarella, we are jarring up the rest of the milk for the refrigerator. So when I use warm milk straight from the cow for cheese making, it's almost always right around 90 degrees. And that's perfect for making a lot of other cheeses, but for mozzarella, I need my cheese to be 55 to 60 degrees before I add the citric acid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 1 gallon of chilled milk, and see how much that cools off my warm milk. And that brings it down to about 75 degrees, but I still need to chill it at least another 10 degrees. So into the refrigerator it goes. So while we wait on that milk to chill, I am going to make some yogurt pops or yogurt popsicles. The family hasn't been eating a lot of yogurt lately, so I'm going to take the yogurt and I went in the freezer, found some frozen cherries. You can use any frozen fruit. And then you could use honey to sweeten it, sugar. I'm going to use some maple syrup. We're just going to blend it all together. If you're not using a liquid sweetener like honey or maple syrup, you might need to add a little bit of milk to make it pourable. Remember, if you're tempted to add a little bit more sweetener, a pinch of salt will often make your sweet taste sweeter. So you can get away with less sweetener if you add a pinch of salt. And I, of course, am using the Redmond's Real Mineral Salt. So these are our favorite popsicle makers, mainly because 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 10. It's for a big family. A lot of the others only have 8 or 6, but these are 10, and they're silicone. And we're just gonna fill each one. Look at that. I guess the amount almost exactly. That one's gonna be a little smaller, but that's okay. And then it's got a lid. So I have not ordered my bulk popsicle sticks yet, but I do have plastic spoons. So I'm going to use plastic spoons in place of popsicle sticks this time. But I usually order a large box of popsicle sticks.
Oh, it looks so funny.
It looks funny.
Yeah.
There we go. I'm going to put the lid on. And we are ready for the freezer. So you want about half skim milk, half whole milk. So I scraped a little bit more cream off the top here. And we're just going to stir the rest of it in. I'm at about 65 degrees. You want it anywhere between 55 and 65 degrees. So for my 3 gallons of milk, I want 3 teaspoons of citric acid. And I'm going to dissolve that citric acid in 1/2 cup of water. And we're going to mix that in really well. I'm going to mix it for about a minute. So here is one thing that I'm doing different than I have in my last mozzarella video, and I am now doing a long culture. So I'm going to take as long as I need to get my other housework done to let this culture. And what that means is I'm going to turn my burner to low and bring it up to 88 degrees over a longer period of time, because that gives a better flavor. So I'm just gonna let this culture for the next couple hours, and I'm just gonna leave the thermometer on here so I can walk by and see how warm it's getting. And just gonna leave my burner on low and let that acid acidify the milk, because that is what's going to create the flavor of your mozzarella.
He was like, this close to napping before I left home, so I was like, either we go now or we go in a couple hours.
We have dishes to do every 5 minutes.
I know, but the thing is, Hadassah.
You have a sister that cooks for you.
Yep, Hadassah.
Yeah.
This guy has gray hair and has a long hair. Are you sure he wants to sleep?
Sensei Wu.
No, Arson. It's a different guy that I know. Arson, the faster you do this,
Oh, don't put it in the, wash that one first.
this guy's just a normal guy that I made. He lives on the farm, and he has
lived on the farm for 84 years. Is that how his hair grew so long? So that ended up being a little bit of a longer ferment than I had planned, because we lost power for about an hour. But our milk has come up to 88 degrees. So we're going to add 3/4 a teaspoon of Renet. We're going to dissolve that rennet in about half a cup of cool water before we add it to our milk. So then you're going to take your rennet and water. You're just going to stir for another whole minute. So then after 10 minutes, you're going to check to see if your curds break clean, and I call that clean because the edges are straight and not ragged. So then we're going to cut our curd. If your edges are ragged, just let it set for another 5 minutes and then check again. So I just cut them into about 1-inch squares, and you really don't have to worry so much about what size your curds are, as long as they are similar in size. So after we've cut our curd, and I'm just going to let it set for about 5 minutes and let the curds heal a bit before I start stirring them. So after a couple minutes have passed, you can start seeing your curds release more of their whey. They'll start sinking, and you'll see them shrinking as well. So I'm just going to turn my burner to low, and I'm going to start stirring these in layers, cutting them into little pieces as I stir. And then you're just going to stir until your curds are about all the same size. So 2 things are happening. As you're heating and stirring your curds, they are releasing their whey. So they're going to shrink and get firm. So we're just going to keep gently stirring them. And if you find big ones like this, you can just break them apart, because what you want to happen is you want them all to be ready at the same time. So you want them all to, your bigger ones of course are going to take longer. So one of the reasons for having your curds all the same size is so that they're all ready at the same time, ready for stretching. So they all release the same amount of whey at the same time. And if you watched my cheddar cheese, my farmhouse cheddar tutorial, or if you watched that video, you're probably noticing that I did not sanitize equipment for the mozzarella, and the main reason for that is that I'm not aging this cheese, so I'm not too worried about contamination, because with your aged cheese, the contamination can show up when it's aging. And although I cleaned all my equipment and made sure everything was clean, I'm not sanitizing it because I'm not going to age it. I'm just going to shred this and put it in the freezer, so bad bacteria is not going to grow. It's not going to have the opportunity to grow. And if you're noticing my arms, nope. I did not get into a cat fight. I was simply weeding my raspberries. So then you are going to turn your burner to low and start heating up your curds and whey. And at the same time, you're going to keep gently stirring the curds to keep them from matting onto the bottom of the pot. And if you find any curds that are big, you're going to break them up and continue to look for the curds that are big and mushy, because you want to break them up so they can release their whey at the same time as the smaller curds do. So after a couple minutes, you're going to start seeing your curds clump together. Just keep your burner on low. And when your curds start hanging together, has as much to do with the pH level as it has to do with the temperature of your curds. So that's why I don't say at this temperature you're going to see this start happening, and at this temperature you're going to see that start happening. You just have to keep stirring them until they start clumping together. And they'll start clumping together when they've released all of their whey. So the two things that you do to help your curds release their whey and start sticking together is slowly heating them up and stirring them at the same time. So when your whey starts feeling like hot dishwater, like what you would make to wash dishes, I'm going to take out about 4 or 5 cups. And you're going to add salt to this warm whey. So you're going to add salt to this whey, not this whey. You're going to set that aside. And you're going to continue to stir your curds. At this point, I realized that I do not have enough salt to make my whey brine for the mozzarella. So I send Hadassah to our friends and neighbors, and she brought home some mineral salt for my cheese brine. So I use 2 to 3 tablespoons of mineral salt per cup of whey. As you stir your curds, you're going to start seeing the smaller curds that have already released all of their whey, and you're going to start seeing them stick together and get a little sticky and stringy. And you're just going to keep stirring. Sometimes mine have all stuck together before my whey gets too hot for my hands, and other times the whey gets too hot for my hands long before my curds start sticking together. And here again, when your curds start sticking together and stretching out, has more to do with the pH level of your curds than it has to do with the temperature of your whey. So as the pH level of your curds comes down and your whey heats up, the protein in the curds are uncoiling. So the protein uncoils and turns into long strands. And then we're about ready to start compressing and stretching the curds and giving the mozzarella its famous stringy and shiny texture. So you can see that my whey has gotten too hot for my hands, but also my curds are starting to stretch. So I'm just going to use a slotted spoon to pick them out of the whey and then stretch them the best I can. You could use a pair of rubber kitchen gloves as well. I just don't like to use the gloves. I'd rather use my hands and a spoon. So with the first pieces that stretch, I'm going to form them into little mozzarella balls, and then I had prepared some olive oil with some chopped basil and salt, mixed it all together, and I'm just going to put those first little balls into this basil infused olive oil for snacking throughout the rest of the day. When I've got larger portions of my curds that are stretching and clunking together, I make my little mozzarella balls like this. I just make a long string and then cut it into small pieces and chuck them all into the olive oil. As larger portions of your curds start sticking together, you're going to have much larger chunks to stretch. And you're just going to find the ones that don't look smooth and stretch them. And then as they cool off, you're going to let them rest in your pot in your hot whey, and you're going to take your spoon and you're going to find another hunk of curds that doesn't look smooth, and then you'll put those back in the pot. And all this time your whey is turned on low to medium low, and you are putting each chunk of mozzarella back into your hot whey and letting it rest while you stretch another one. Once I feel like all of my curds have been stretched, at least had a turn to be stretched once, and they're starting to look shiny, I start gathering them up to make my mozzarella ball. And letting them rest on the bottom of the pot will make them really hot and soft, and then you can press them together. So I'm just going to take my spoon and find more curds and press them into this mozzarella ball that I am forming. Occasionally, I'm going to let the ball rest on the bottom of the pot for probably 10 to 15 seconds and get it good and hot so that I can add more of my curds. And then the last bit of stretching I do while the mozzarella is very hot and in this ball. And I just kind of keep stretching it and pushing it up through the center like you would if you were making dinner rolls or something. And you can see the outside of the ball get real smooth and shiny. And anytime it starts breaking or getting too stiff to work with, I just put it back in the hot whey and then start pushing it up through the middle and stretching the outside of that ball some more. My best piece of advice for stretching your mozzarella is do not try to adhere to a time frame or a temperature. Your mozzarella, to turn out well, has to stretch, and if however hot you have to make your whey to get your mozzarella to stretch, that is the temperature that you need that day. So when you're satisfied that it is smooth and stretchy enough, you're going to form it into a ball and put it into that salted whey water that you prepared earlier. And now you're not going to put it into the refrigerator. Your mozzarella will turn out best if you let it rest at room temperature for the next 6 to 12 hours. So you can turn your mozzarella in the whey brine if you want to. Mine was floating a little bit, so it has this little dry spot on top. We're gonna make a caprese salad with some of our fresh mozzarella, and then we're gonna shred the rest and put it in the freezer for pizza type dishes. I want my favorite cheese knife. It's good. The best thing that I can tell you about learning to make mozzarella is jump in and do it. And then don't just stick to one person's videos or recipes. Try to compare them and figure out the differences between the two. And some people explain things in a way that just makes more sense to you. So, and I'm sure there's people that do it differently than I do. There's people that understand it better than I do. There's people that are more professional about their cheese making than I am. And combining all of the information about cheese making and putting it into practice is your fastest way to master cheese making. You can also make mozzarella with store-bought pasteurized milk as long as it's not ultra pasteurized, because ultra pasteurized milk, the proteins are too destroyed and they will not stretch or stick together well enough to make a good mozzarella.
You have to get lined up just with that. Just with the window.
And we did get some gardening done this week in between rain showers. We planted 1,000 count of sweet corn, and we also planted half a pound of bush green beans. We also planted around 30 tomato plants, some of them paste tomatoes like Romas or Amish paste, and the other are heirloom varieties like Delicious and Goliath. We also planted our bell peppers, and that means that the garden is mostly planted, and we are just going to fill in the empty spots with some of our extras like squash and cucumbers and some hot peppers and sweet potatoes.